Hey there, it's Mattea. Thanks for taking the time to listen to Bookends today. If you've been enjoying our show, it would be a huge help for us, and I think also for you, to follow us on your favorite podcast app, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever app you use to listen. This will ultimately help us make more Bookends episodes and connect you with more of your favorite authors. I hope you enjoy today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Hey there, I'm Mattea Roach. Welcome to Bookends. I really connect with dystopian fiction that feels close to home. Like it could become our reality in 20 or 10 or even just 5 years. And I definitely felt that when I was reading Helen Phillips' new novel, Hum. Hum is set in the near future where climate change is out of control and technology constantly watches over us, where superintelligent robots are taking over all of the jobs. And things we might take for granted, like having privacy, being able to get out in nature, even just breathing fresh air, have become luxuries that only a few people can afford. And it's in this world where we meet May. She's a mom who's out of work and desperate for a break, so she tries an experimental procedure in exchange for a big payday. But what at first seems like a chance at a brighter future ends up threatening everything she loves most. Helen Phillips is the author of 6 books, including novels, short story collections, and even a work of children's fiction. She also teaches creative writing at Brooklyn College. I spoke with Helen from her home in Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Helen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I want to ask about the end notes, actually. And this was something that I feel like I haven't often seen in fiction, that there was such a robust citation of specific articles that you had read that inspired elements of the book. What was the research and development process like for Hum?
When I'm beginning any of my books, and especially with Hum, I really start with my anxieties. So my anxieties are my inspiration. Coming to understand those anxieties more deeply, confronting them, maybe finding some sort of resolution. And for me, the process of confronting the anxieties is learning more about the things that I'm worried about. So in the case of Hum, I was worried and thinking a lot about climate change. I was thinking about artificial intelligence. I was thinking about surveillance. And so I just began the process by reading a bunch of books and articles about those things. And they really informed and inspired my writing process. So the first few months of writing the book were really just exclusively reading up a lot on those topics. And I very much wanted the endnotes to be there, both as a way to share something about the process of arriving at the book, but even more so just because those writers and thinkers had been so important to me, it was the ethical thing to do to give credit.
It sounds like, from what you're saying, anxiety is this animating force, not just in Hum, but also in your previous works. Why do you think you're drawn to writing as a way of processing these anxieties that you might have about various things going on in the world?
I think that has something to do with my childhood. So when I was 11 years old, I lost all of my hair due to the autoimmune condition alopecia. And even before that happened, I was already a really passionate reader and writer. But especially in that time in my life, writing provided just a space of freedom to grapple with this reality of being a bald pre-teenager in our society, which had plenty of challenges. And when I was 13 years old, I set myself the New Year's resolution to write a poem every day. And I kept that resolution for the next 8 years and wrote a lot of poetry. So writing for me is a place, and has for many, many, many years, basically it feels like my entire life, been a place where I take what I'm anxious about and what I'm struggling with and try to give language to it. Because when I give language to it, then it transforms into something that I can share with someone else. And when I share it with someone else, it's no longer a burden that I'm carrying alone. Hopefully my readers don't mind sharing the burden with me, or at least maybe seeing some reflection of their own anxiety in my work.
I want to get right into the story, which opens with your main character, May. And we meet her in an operating room where she's agreed to have this experimental face-altering surgery. But her family really doesn't want her to do it. What brought her to this place?
Well, she lost her job because she was replaced by artificial intelligence. And in fact, it was artificial intelligence that she helped to train. And she's been having a really hard time finding a job since then. In this world, just a little in the future, a lot of jobs have been lost to automation. And she believes this surgery, even though it's a disturbing surgery, it's going to subtly modify the 68 points of her face print so that she can't be recognized by surveillance. But she's driven really by desperation and need for money, and also for hope and slightly better opportunities for her family.
Your novel explores a lot of the concerns that people have about artificial intelligence and automation through this one intelligent robot called a hum. We first see that robot because it's performing May's surgery, but they're everywhere in this world. How did you want readers to feel about the hums in the novel?
So I hope that as the reader is reading, you're wondering, wait, how much is the hum understanding? How much consciousness or awareness does the hum have? I hope that the reader has a very complicated relationship with the hum, much as I have, say, a complicated relationship with my own cell phone. You're fascinated by it. You're terrified of it. You think it's cute and helpful. You find it sinister. All of these things should be part of the relationship that the reader has to the hum, and certainly that May has to the hum. So I was very excited when I came up with the name Hums for the robots in the book. So on the one hand, we think of this low simmering hum of all of our digital devices, the simmering hum of the internet. It's sort of like almost a maddening sound that you can never turn off. But on the other hand, humming is a way that we use our bodies to make music. You hum to yourself while you're doing the dishes. You hum a lullaby perhaps to a child as they're going to sleep. And it's connected to the sacred sound Om. So hum contains for me all of that duality, and I really wanted that to be present in the character of the hum.
I'm wondering, you mentioned something about being a bit fascinated and also terrified and having this complex relationship with like your own cell phone, the technologies that we in our world use. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
That is very much a theme of the book, and I'm actually going to read now the epigraph to the book. Poison is in everything, and no thing is without poison. The dosage makes it either a poison or a remedy. When I encountered that quote, it really captured something for me. The dosage makes it either a poison or a remedy. The technologies that humans have created are miraculous and astounding and give us so much capacity. Even just for me, and on a simple level, just my children can't even imagine a world where you can't FaceTime with your grandparents who live in a different state. So that is really miraculous. But also, these technologies can serve to really separate us from one another. We can be distracted by our phones when we're at the dinner table. We can maybe treat people poorly online in a way that we would never treat them in person. So the book is really getting at that complexity that you've mentioned.
Yeah, what you mentioned about having children and your children not being able to imagine what a world would be like without certain technology is definitely something that shows up in the book. I think one interaction that really stuck with me was this interaction between May and her daughter, who I think is like elementary school aged. And May's daughter says she feels so bad that her mother never grew up with a bunny, which is like this wristwatch type device, kind of a more advanced version of like an Apple Watch, a phone. It allows parents to track their kids. Kids use it for class, that sort of thing. And there's this real sense of you must have felt so lonely. You must have felt so lost without this technology. Do you find as a parent, like, is this a rift that you experience in your relationship with your own kids at all? Because I definitely have had this sort of conversation with my mother where the technology she had access to as a child was so different than what I grew up with.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up that moment because I think it's it's a small moment in the book, but for me, it was a really important one. I don't want to just inherently automatically assume that kids who grow up with greater technology than their parents aren't having as authentic a life experience. I think that I have a little bit of a Luddite tendency to say, oh, it used to be better when there weren't all these technologies. But part of what happens in the book is that you see the children really adjusting to the environment that they're in and having this incredible flexibility of existence that really evades their parents. So I also want the book to linger in that complexity, that my knee-jerk reaction is it's not good for the kids to have these bunnies, but the kids reap benefit from them. So again, I go back to the idea of what dosage will make these things a poison or a remedy. Humans evolved over such a long period of time biologically, and now these technological evolutions are just happening so quickly. It isn't the pace that we're accustomed to at all. And I appreciated the Surgeon General of the United States recently said some very compassionate stuff about how difficult it is for parents because the technology is ahead of the research in terms of the effects of social media and all of these advances on our children. And we are having to make daily decisions about how we introduce them to our kids.
This element of it being so difficult for parents to know what the right thing is to do, whether it's introducing new technology, whether it's deciding what sorts of products are ethical to buy for their children, that's a pervasive theme in this book. There's the technological anxiety that May feels about her kids' reliance on their bunnies. There's also an eco-anxiety where she feels terrible when she buys things that are kind of like conspicuous consumption, also feels terrible when she doesn't buy things from her family, that she may be robbing her children of certain experiences. As we enter kind of a period of like really extreme disposability, I would say with a lot of goods, clothes are available very cheaply and at low quality. Food is often available cheaply and at low quality. Certain kinds of like treat type things that you might give a kid. How does May, and I guess perhaps how do you navigate trying to manage your children's happiness with these kinds of like ethical decisions about how to raise them?
Yes, that is a hard question. And as you say, it's very relentless. I really, in the book, tried to emphasize that relentlessness because one trait that the Hums have is they have these screens on their bodies that are constantly advertising to you. So you'll be in the middle of a conversation with a Hum that feels like you're having a substantial exchange, and then they'll kind of take a minute to be like, wait, these earrings would look a lot better with that outfit. And you suddenly realize, oh, I thought we were engaging in conversation, but actually I'm being advertised to. And though that might sound potentially a little absurd, I actually think that's one of the most realistic aspects of the book to our current moment, the way you'll be watching a show and an ad will come on. So we experience pretty relentless advertising, and you have to have a certain strength and peace of mind to resist it. I think it really can be an insidious thing.
There was this quote. It's something that the Hum says in the novel, but from what I understand, it actually came directly from a conversation and interview that you did with a sociologist in the process of writing this novel that says, the goal of advertising is to rip a hole in your heart so it can then fill that hole with plastic or with any other materials that can be yanked out of the earth, and after brief sojourns as objects of desire, be converted to waste. Why did you find that so striking?
Well, that was indeed from an interview that I did with my colleague at Brooklyn College, Professor Ken Gould, and I highly recommend his work to everyone. He studies the societal impacts of climate change and capitalism. And we were doing the interview at Brooklyn College in the fall of 2019, and he said something very close to that language, and it just struck me. It just felt like such a succinct and beautiful articulation of late capitalism and the problems of consumerism. So in the book, the moment that the hum says it is actually very meaningful, because if you give a certain amount of money to this system, to the hum, you can turn off their advertising. And when you are able to turn off the hum's advertising, a much more profound level of conversation becomes available. So right after May turns off the hum's advertising is when the hum says that devastating thing about the role of advertising. And you realize that the hum is trapped in this system, but is also able to critique it.
May, your main character, grew up near a forest and is desperate for her kids to be exposed to some sort of authentic nature experience similar to what she would have had as a child. I know for you, you grew up in Colorado and had access to this kind of like pristine nature. You grew up near forests. I'm wondering how your upbringing has informed your writing and informed your treatment of nature in this novel.
Yes, it's very significant, this idea of place. And even on the very first page of the book, May is undergoing this operation, and she thinks to get through this pain and discomfort that she's feeling with a needle inching closer to her eye, she needs to imagine the forest of her childhood. But then immediately we learn that the forest of her childhood has burned. I grew up in the foothills west of Denver, where the fire risk is very high. And thankfully, my childhood home has been spared thus far. But when the wildfires burn in the west, that feels very, very close to home for me. In the book, May, after reaping this money from this surgery, buys her family passes to enter the botanical gardens, this one remaining green space within the city. And though she lives now very far from the mountains where she grew up, she is hopeful that entering this space will provide her children, indeed, as you said, with some of that joy she experienced as a child. And it does to some extent, but the gardens are not quite what they seem, and some darker events unfold there. But I would say that one of the earliest images for the book, one of the very earliest seeds, was that particular feeling when you live in an urban place and you enter a park or you enter a botanic garden. I live right by Greenwood Cemetery, a almost 500-acre cemetery in Brooklyn. And just the sensation of being surrounded by concrete and cars and then entering green spaces with trees, and just what a transporting experience that is. So I really wanted the book, and I hope it does, to evoke that transformative power of urban green spaces.
I also live in a city, but very close to one of the largest parks in the city. And when I go for a walk, you know, I can be 15 minutes from my house and feel like I'm not in a city at all. The only real signs of the city are like the way that the park is manicured. It's obviously not authentic nature, totally untouched, but it doesn't feel like I'm in a city of several million people. You know, you mentioned you live very close to Greenwood Cemetery. It feels like nature is definitely still a preoccupation for you, and you're raising a family in a very different environment than the one you grew up in. What's your relationship with nature like now? And what's your kids' relationship with nature like?
I think that being attuned to nature can happen in a city. But for instance, it's different from, you know, the wilderness of Colorado. But there's this one flock of pigeons that always takes flight above us when I walk my son to school. And every morning we're like, look at how organized they are flying in that pattern. And in Hum, the children don't have a ton of exposure to animals, but they do find a cockroach in their room, and they adopt the cockroach and they put it in a little jar, and then they're really sad when it dies. So maybe that's pathetic. But on the other hand, a part of what I'm speaking to is just children's ability to be fascinated in their environment and to find the little sparks of nature and sparks of intrigue everywhere. So I do hope that raising my children in this city, I'm passing on to them just that attentiveness to, oh, look, that tree is changing color now. And, oh, look, that tree budded yesterday. It didn't have its leaves out yesterday, the day before. And just being attentive to those things.
Mm-hmm. There's also this kind of sinister element of surveillance capitalism in the book, and it's definitely something that's present throughout society. But what's interesting is, as you mentioned earlier, like the botanical gardens aren't totally what they seem initially. The surveillance capitalism is still pervasive within the park. There's a moment where May and Jem, her husband, are, having a bit of a romantic moment enhanced by 3 of May's favorite songs playing in a row. And there's still like an algorithm that's responsible. It's not Jem being romantic. What are some of like the advantages and pitfalls of having technology embedded in the natural environment in this manner and like not being detached from your phone, even when you go on a hike, say?
Well, May certainly is preoccupied with this question. And when she takes her family to the garden, one of her conditions is they can't bring their bunnies, they can't bring their phones. They're really going to be disconnected from technology so that they can fully experience nature. And she does meet with some resistance from her family, but then she gets her wish. They go to the garden, they're disconnected. And then something happens that causes her to really, really regret having done that and disconnected her children and disconnected herself. But with that plot twist, I was trying to get at, again, this gray area that we can say, oh, it's so great to be disconnected and we're so free now and we're just having this authentic experience, until suddenly you really, really, really wish you had your phone. So I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, is it awesome that you can go for a hike in the wilderness and your phone can be telling you which trail to go on so you can't really get lost and wander around? Is something lost when we aren't ever able to be lost? I don't know. But then as someone with children, it is very nice to be able to track and surveil them when they're walking to school alone. So I feel complicated about all of that, and I hope that the book captures that.
Yeah, it definitely is complicated. It seems a bit, again, one of these generational things. Like I've spoken to people that are a couple of years younger than me who are really into having Find My Friends activated on their phone, and they want to know where everyone who's close to them is at all times. I, meanwhile, am like, I'll turn it on for a couple of hours if I'm driving somewhere to meet someone and want them to know where I am on the road, and then turn it back off again, because the thought of being surveilled like that I find extremely disconcerting. But I think that sort of thinking about things as this technology becomes kind of more embedded in our lives is probably going to become like a little bit obsolete and Luddite. As AI has become a thing that we can all use very easily, the AI in the novel has become like so human that it's maybe cracking jokes, it's giving therapy to people. How do you feel about this moment that we're at, where we seem to have made a lot of progress recreating and externalizing humanity, and we don't even really totally understand how humans work? So, like, how is it going to work that we're recreating it?
It's very disconcerting to me. I think it's very disconcerting to a lot of people. One book I read in my research that offered a more positive perspective on human AI collaborations is a book called The Artist in the Machine by Professor Arthur I. Miller, which I would highly recommend for anyone interested in the positive potential of human AI collaborations. But I do think that in the book, you see the humans outsourcing certain aspects of their humanity to the hums. And there was recently a reviewer that noted that. And certainly that is an element of the book, but even more so, I was really looking for, or wanting the book to ask the question, what is it that makes us unique as humans, even as AI becomes more and more advanced? What are the deepest emotions or deepest bodily experiences, like smelling your child's hair or holding your partner's hand, that can't be taken away from us? And how can we be aware of those things? How can we appreciate and cherish them and hang on to them? And I certainly at the end of the book really tried to make those elements be present.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that we so often talk about what's lost as automation advances, or now as AI advances, in terms of work and in terms of people being put out of work, that there are certain tasks and crafts that humans will no longer do. This is sort of the first time in reading this book that I've had to contend with, like, what if the emotional experience of being human turns out to not be unique either? And it does feel like there must be some sort of core essence that can't be replicated, but like I don't know what it is, and I'm sort of scared to be proven wrong, perhaps. Is there anything in particular that makes you feel hopeful about the future of tech and the future of our relationship with technology as humans?
Well, one thing that I came across in my research for the book was I conducted several interviews. And I would begin the interviews by asking, what are you worried about? And depending on the person's field, whether that was sociology or studying supply chains or making renewable fabrics, the person would have some different answer. But then when I would ask at the end, what makes you hopeful? They all had the same answer, and it was collective action. And that sounds like an oversimplistic answer, but it was really interesting to me that that was true across my interviews, that collective action is the way to make things happen. You know, it's hard to know all the time what that means or how to implement that, but it did give me a certain feeling of hope that there was some agreement about that at least. And I think that one of the first steps to collective action is to be attuned and connected to the people around us and to try to understand what is on their mind, what are they worried about, what are they thinking about. So we need to tune into one another and tap into one another as a first step.
Well, I am glad that we were able to end this conversation on a somewhat hopeful note after talking about a lot of things that really concern me and cause me to lose sleep sometimes. Helen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
So wonderful to chat with you. Thank you so much.
That was Helen Phillips, the author of Hum. This episode was produced by Lisa Matthews. Aili Yamamoto is our associate producer. Our senior producer is Jacqueline Kirk, and our executive producer is Aaron Balser. Shout out to our audio tech, Aronde Williams, and to the CBC Books team who bring you all the goods on social media and on our website. If you enjoyed this interview, you might also like my conversation with Jeff Vandermeer, author of the Southern Reach series. Here's a little taste. For folks that maybe need a refresher, haven't read the novels, what's the Seance and Science Brigade?
They literally are this kind of troupe of amateur psychic investigators. And I got the idea in a really interesting way. And it's kind of like what was in my head when I was writing Absolution, which is to say there's this place called the Coral Castle in Miami, built by this eccentric Lithuanian. And it has all of these amazing fortifications and weird sculptures that line up with the equinox and the moon and the sun. And the day that I went there was a team of psychics investigating the effects and a team of scientists. And they were they were on two separate sides of this structure doing entirely different things. And I was just fascinated that this one place could pull both groups who are pretty much diametrically opposed in their view of the world into this. And so the idea and the name came from that. And I had the idea that their intervention and Central's intervention with them was pretty key to a lot of the things that happened with Area X.
You can head to the link in the description to catch the rest of that conversation. Make sure to follow Bookends to access our archive of interviews and to keep up with some of the fantastic guests we have coming up. And of course, you can always catch the show on Sundays and Wednesdays on CBC Radio. I'm Mattea Roach, and this is Bookends. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Because when the book ends, the conversation begins.